In the desolate expanse of Afghanistan, far from the prying eyes of the world, there exists an abandoned Soviet military base. The local villagers speak of it in hushed tones, warning travelers of the malevolent spirits that haunt its ruins. It was to this forsaken place that Lieutenant David Harris and his squad were sent, tasked with gathering intelligence on enemy movements in the area. Lieutenant Harris, a seasoned officer with an unshakable resolve, led a team of 5 soldiers. Corporal Mike Jensen, a jovial and resourceful man specialist Laura Taylor, known for her keen senses and sharp intuition, Private Jack Collins, a young recruit eager to prove himself, and Sergeant Alex Ramirez, a veteran with a pragmatic outlook. Their mission was straightforward, but the rumors surrounding the base filled them with an unspoken unease. As they approached the base, the sky darkened and an unnatural chill settled over them. The buildings, once bustling with life, now stood as decaying monuments to a forgotten time. Vines and weeds crept over rusting tanks and crumbling walls, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Setting up camp inside the remnants of the main building, they felt a sense of foreboding that they couldn't quite shake. "This place gives me the creeps," Corporal Jensen muttered, trying to lighten the mood. "Focus on the mission," Lieutenant Harris replied curtly, though he too felt the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on him. The first night passed uneventfully, but as they began their reconnaissance the next day, strange occurrences started to unfold. Specialist Taylor noticed flickering shadows in the corners of her vision, but every time she turned, there was nothing there. Private Collins reported hearing whispers in a language he couldn't understand, and Sergeant Ramirez found his equipment inexplicably tampered with. "It's just the wind," Harris reassured them, though doubt gnawed at his mind. As darkness fell again, the temperature plummeted, and an oppressive silence enveloped the base. The squad huddled around a small fire, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then, without warning, the silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the empty halls. "Did you hear that?" Taylor whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay calm. It's probably just the wind," Harris said, though his voice lacked conviction. They soon discovered the source of the scream. A spectral figure of a Soviet soldier, his face twisted in agony, appeared before them. His translucent form seemed to flicker like a faulty projection, and he reached out towards them, his eyes pleading for something they could not give. "What the hell is that?" Collins cried, backing away in terror. "Stand your ground," Harris ordered, though his own fear was evident. The ghostly soldier began to speak in Russian, his voice a mournful wail that echoed in their minds. Specialist Taylor, who understood some Russian, translated his words. "Help me. Trapped. Cannot rest." As the apparition grew more distressed, the temperature dropped further, and the ground beneath them began to shake. The squad watched in horror as more ghostly figures emerged from the walls, their hollow eyes staring into their souls. The air was thick with a palpable sense of despair, and the soldiers felt an overwhelming urge to flee. "We need to get out of here," Jensen shouted, his voice trembling. "We can't leave until we understand what's happening," Harris insisted, though his resolve was weakening. In a desperate bid to communicate with the spirits, Specialist Taylor stepped forward, addressing the spectral soldier in halting Russian. She asked what they wanted, why they were haunting this place. The ghost's response was chilling. "We were betrayed. Left to die. Our souls cannot rest." Realizing that the spirits were trapped in a cycle of torment due to their untimely and unjust deaths, Harris decided they had to find a way to help them move on. They spent the next day searching the base for any clues, eventually discovering a hidden chamber filled with old documents and personal belongings of the Soviet soldiers. Among them was a diary that detailed the soldiers' last days betrayed by their commanders and left to die in a hopeless battle. As night fell once more, they gathered the relics and held a makeshift memorial, hoping to bring peace to the restless spirits. They read aloud from the diary, acknowledging the soldiers' pain and promising that their story would not be forgotten. The air grew still, and the ghostly figures appeared again, but this time their expressions were calmer, more at peace. "Thank you," the spectral soldier said in Russian, before fading away into the night. The temperature slowly returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The squad, though shaken, felt a sense of relief. They had done what they could to honor the fallen and bring an end to their suffering. As they prepared to leave the base, Harris reflected on the experience, realizing that some battles are fought not with weapons, but with compassion and understanding. War leaves scars on the land and on the souls of those who fight. Lieutenant Harris and his squad learned that the echoes of past conflicts can linger long after the fighting has ceased, and sometimes it takes a willingness to confront those echoes to find peace. The abandoned Soviet base was no longer just a relic of history. It was a reminder that the past must be acknowledged for the future to be free from its haunting grip. In the frozen wilderness of Siberia, a remote outpost from World War II stood abandoned, shrouded in mystery and fear. This desolate place, known as Outpost 31, was a secret research facility where the Soviet Union conducted experiments on captured soldiers and civilians. Decades later, Captain Emily Ross and her team of elite operatives were sent to investigate reports of strange occurrences in the area. Captain Ross, a determined and fearless leader, was joined by Lieutenant Mark Davis, a seasoned combat specialist Sergeant Linda Green, an expert in survival and reconnaissance Corporal Jake Miller, a tech-savvy communications officer and Private Aaron Lee, the youngest member with a knack for mechanics. Their mission was to uncover any remnants of the experiments and gather intelligence. As they arrived at the outpost, a sense of unease settled over the team. The bitter cold bit into their skin, and the wind howled like a mournful wail. The outpost was a decaying relic, its walls covered in ice and snow, with broken windows and doors hanging ajar. The interior was equally foreboding, with long, dark corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. "This place feels wrong," Private Lee muttered, glancing nervously at the shadows. "Stay focused. We have a job to do," Captain Ross replied, though she shared his unease. The first day was spent setting up camp and exploring the outpost. They found old documents, scientific equipment, and eerie remnants of the past. But as night fell, the true horror began to reveal itself. The temperature dropped even further, and an unnatural silence enveloped the building. "Can anyone else hear that?" Lieutenant Davis asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Hear what?" Corporal Miller replied, looking around. "A sort of humming, like a machine," Davis said, straining to listen. Suddenly the lights flickered, and a low, mechanical hum filled the air. The team gathered in the main hall, their breath visible in the freezing air. The hum grew louder, and a figure appeared in the doorway, a ghostly apparition of a Soviet scientist, his eyes hollow and his face twisted in agony. "What the hell is that?" Sergeant Green exclaimed, raising her weapon. "Hold your fire," Ross commanded, trying to make sense of the apparition. The ghostly scientist moved toward them, his form flickering like an old film reel. He began to speak in Russian, his voice echoing through the hall. Corporal Miller, who understood Russian, translated, "Help us. We are trapped in the machine." The team looked at each other, confusion and fear evident in their eyes. As they tried to communicate with the spirit, more apparitions appeared: soldiers, civilians, all with the same tormented expressions. The outpost was filled with the mournful cries of the dead, and the team realized they were not alone. "We need to find that machine," Ross decided, determination in her voice. They searched the outpost, following the ghostly apparitions and the strange humming sound. Eventually, they found a hidden laboratory deep within the facility. In the center of the room stood an old, rusted machine, wires and tubes snaking out from it like the tentacles of a monstrous creature. The humming was deafening now, and the apparitions gathered around it, their eyes pleading for release. "This must be it," Lieutenant Davis said, approaching the machine cautiously. "Be careful," Sergeant Green warned, her eyes scanning the room. Captain Ross examined the machine, trying to understand its purpose. Corporal Miller found an old journal nearby and began to read. It says here that the machine was designed to harness the energy of the human soul to create a super soldier. But something went wrong, and the souls were trapped inside. "We have to shut it down," Ross said firmly. As they worked to disable the machine, the apparitions grew more agitated, their cries becoming desperate. The temperature dropped further, and the room was filled with an icy mist. Private Lee managed to find the main power source and, with trembling hands, began to disconnect it. Suddenly, the machine roared to life, and the apparitions screamed in unison. The team felt a force pushing them back, and the air crackled with energy. Ross shouted over the noise, "Everyone, hold on. We're almost there." With a final, desperate effort, they managed to disconnect the power source. The machine sputtered and died, the humming ceased, and the apparitions began to fade. The room grew eerily quiet, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. The ghostly figures, now at peace, smiled gratefully before disappearing into the ether. "It's over," Davis said, relief washing over him. "Let's get out of here," Ross agreed, her voice steady but exhausted. As they left the outpost, the team couldn't shake the feeling of what they had experienced. The horrors of Outpost 31 were a stark reminder of the dark experiments conducted in the name of war. They had freed the trapped souls, but the memory of their tormented faces would haunt them forever. War leaves scars, both visible and invisible. Captain Ross and her team learned that the past can cast long shadows, and sometimes the only way to find peace is to confront the darkness head-on. The haunted outpost in Siberia was a testament to the forgotten victims of war, and their mission a reminder that some battles continue long after the last shot is fired. If you're finding value in this video so far, do me a quick favor and hit that like button below. Enjoy. In the heart of the Vietnam War, a platoon of soldiers was dispatched to a remote area known for its strategic importance and deadly dangers. This was a place where the oppressive heat and the constant threat of ambush were a soldier's daily companions. But there was something else in those jungles, something far more sinister. Sergeant James Mitchell, a battle-hardened leader, was tasked with leading his men through this green hell. With him were Private Tom Wilkins, a fresh-faced recruit with a nervous smile, and Corporal Sarah Lopez, one of the few women on the front lines, known for her sharp shooting and sharper wit. Their mission was simple recon and report. On their first night, as they set up camp under the canopy of twisted trees, an eerie silence settled over them. The usual sounds of the jungle seemed to fade, replaced by a sense of being watched. Private Wilkins couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were upon them, eyes that didn't belong to any human. "Sarge, do you hear that?" Wilkins whispered. "It's just your mind playing tricks, Wilkins." "Get some rest," Mitchell replied gruffly. The next day, as they trekked deeper into the jungle, the unsettling incidents began. Corporal Lopez was the first to notice something was off. The trail they were following seemed to loop back on itself, no matter how carefully they navigated. Equipment went missing, only to reappear in odd places. And then there were the voices, faint, distant, and chilling. "I swear I heard someone calling my name last night," murmured Lopez. "Jungle's full of sounds." "Focus on the mission," Mitchell said impatiently. But as night fell again, the voices grew louder, more insistent. Shadows moved just beyond the firelight, and the men felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Sleep was impossible. And then, on the third night, they saw her, a ghostly figure in tattered Vietnamese clothing, her eyes hollow, her mouth a silent scream. Private Wilkins was the first to see her, standing at the edge of the camp, her form barely visible in the dim light. He froze, unable to look away, as she slowly raised a hand, pointing directly at him. Panic set in as he scrambled to alert the others, but when they looked, she was gone. "I saw her. She was right there," Wilkins exclaimed, shaking. "Everyone stay alert. We're not alone out here." Mitchell tried to stay calm. As the nights wore on, the ghostly apparitions became more frequent and more terrifying. The soldiers could no longer deny the supernatural presence that stalked them. Equipment malfunctioned, rations spoiled overnight, and the jungle itself seemed to conspire against them. The men were on the brink of madness, their nerves frayed by the relentless terror. On the sixth night, the haunting reached its peak. The ghostly woman appeared again, this time within the camp, her silent scream now a deafening wail that echoed in their minds. Sergeant Mitchell, driven by a mix of fear and fury, fired his weapon at the apparition. But the bullets passed through her, hitting nothing but air. "It's no use. She's not real," Lopez cried out in desperation. In a final horrifying moment, the ghost lunged at Private Wilkins, and he felt an icy grip around his throat. His comrades watched in helpless terror as he collapsed, gasping for breath. And then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished, leaving behind only the sound of Wilkins' ragged breathing and the echo of her wail. By dawn, the platoon was a shattered shell of its former self. The jungle had taken its toll, not just physically but mentally. They abandoned their mission, retreating back to base with stories that few would believe. Private Wilkins survived but was forever haunted by the ghostly figure. He never spoke of that night again, but the fear in his eyes told the tale. War leaves scars, some seen, others unseen. For Sergeant Mitchell and his men, the jungles of Vietnam were not just a battleground, but a gateway to a world of unspeakable horror. And for those who venture into such places, they must remember sometimes the past does not rest easy, and the dead have their own stories to tell. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. Your support helps us keep creating awesome content for you.